Three friends boarded Disney's Galactic Starcruiser to seek their destiny and emerged as heroes of the Halcyon.
Bright Sun Starcruiser superfans, and welcome to Heroes of the Halcyon, the best, and to the best of our knowledge, only Galactic Starcruiser superfan podcast on the interwebs. I am Starcruiser superfan Martin, and with me are...
Superfan Christine.
And Superfan Drew.
Well, I am so excited to announce a return guest. We had so much fun talking with this guest last time, but there was so much more to talk with her about. Drew, can you tell us all about our guest this week?
Our guest this week is Jen Eyre of Eyre Cosplay. We last spoke with Jen in late September for the podcast when we covered a little bit about the LARPing origins of the Galactic Starcruiser experience. We've gone on our second voyage, as many of you know, and we found that when we left the second voyage, we still had kind of that malaise after the experience that we'd experienced the first time. And this is a concept that a lot of people have referred to as LARP bleed or LARP drop. As one of the people who runs a Facebook group dedicated to helping people through their post-voyage Galactic Starcruiser drop, Jen was a perfect person to talk about this with. In the conversation, we also cover a lot more about general LARPing issues, and we'd like for you to hear that now. Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining us. We had a great time talking with you about LARPing as a member of the Starcruiser during a previous episode. So thanks again for joining us again today. How have you been?
I've been good. It's been definitely a busy fall. I departed from the Starcruiser. The school year started up again. And I think when we talked, it was in the middle of things being very busy with school. I'm a teacher. I got to go to two phenomenal events afterwards and get that same kind of emotion we experienced on the Halcyon at those other events, which was a big help for me. And I'll talk more about that in terms of LARP drop and LARP bleed and those emotions. But it's been a pretty busy fall.
Well, real quick, Jen, I don't want to interrupt too much. So if you had something, just keep it in mind. But there was a New Yorker article that happened mid-summer sometime, and the author of that article had gone on the Starcruiser and brought up the term LARP bleed. And so I kind of grasped on it because I was trying to find the terminology to describe this feeling that was very palpable and very real for all three of us. As we've said before, that's why we're doing this podcast, is to process these feelings. I also hear you use the term drop. Your Facebook group, the Galactic Starcruiser Voyage, post-voyage drop, you use the word drop and bleed. What's the difference between those two concepts?
Yeah, really great question. So I'll start with drop. My friend Naomi and I run the Starcruiser drop page. She had never LARPed before, and similar to the conversation we've had, she didn't realize the emotion she'd be experiencing. So we started talking and decided to start and run that group together. And I think drop is the more important phenomenon to talk about first because it can be the scariest one. So drop is when you've got the high of the emotions you're feeling after an event, the high of emotions you're feeling during an event, that catharsis, that excitement, that joy, that satisfaction. The drop is all of a sudden you have to go back to the mundane world. You go back to the regular world, and those emotions can't stay at level 11. They go back down. And even if your regular emotions are about a level 5 is a whole lot different than 11. Mm-hmm. Hopefully you have listeners who appreciate the Spinal Tap reference.
Yes. We do at the very least, so there's that.
So that's what's important. So that drop is typically your emotions are going to go back to normal, and they might even go a little bit lower than normal because you're wondering, okay, when am I going to be able to experience that again? You're missing it. So drop is that where you're coming back down after the amazing experience. Okay. And people experience this after any kind of big event, conventions. It's a big thing after conventions, when you get to go see all your friends, dress up, see amazing panels. You get that after conventions. You get that after big events like weddings or graduations. Any time where you've got that big emotional high, and even if you're having like sobbing emotions, it's still you're still having that emotional high, and you come back down for drop.
Okay.
And I think drop has a little more of kind of a negative connotation just because, I mean, it's part of the life cycle of interactive theater and interactive experiences. Bleed is where those the emotions you were feeling at an event start to bleed or transfer into your regular life. And you also hear that a lot with theater. Emotion bleed is where, especially if you're playing a character who has a personality different from yourself, you might have some of their emotions that you were feeling as them in that situation. So like if I'm playing a character who really hates another person's character, I've had times where I had to stop and remind myself, oh wait, no, that's their character, and they're my friend. It's not even like it's some random person that I hate. I have to stop and say, okay, it's and just like recognizing that it's drop helps you process, recognizing it to say, okay, wait, I don't really hate them. They're one of my best friends. They did such a good job playing an antagonizing character to my character. So I think bleed is a lot of recognizing what it is and stop. I think bleed can also be dangerous I think more so in LARPs or in theater, where if people are playing romantic interests, it's why you see that those feelings, but they're acting that romantic interest, can transfer off to real life. I think that's why you see so many Hollywood people, they work together on a film and then all of a sudden they've left their significant others and are together, and it doesn't last long because the emotions weren't real. They were bleeding from that character.
Okay.
There are definitely, and this phenomenon is more and more known. There's a lot more awareness about it. So there's a lot more processing, and in certain LARPs, they will do that deal with a lot more intense emotional subjects. They will have procedures and scheduled activities and time to process in place specifically to address that bleed. So people, so it's a kind of, I think part of the thought behind it is your brain needs closure. So some of those activities provide that closure so people can kind of go back to how things regularly are. Okay. And it's not to say that everyone who LARPs will experience that.
Of course.
And there's a lot of people who LARP who don't do romantic relationships. Like I don't do romantic relationships when I LARP. My husband and I played characters who were married in one game, and it was the end of that game's arc. So usually if a game has like a 5-year arc, as it gets into year 4 and year 5 starts, things ramp up. It's that part of the trilogy when everything's bad. It's almost like you think of like the end of Empire Strikes Back. You're at the part in the LARP campaign where people are frozen in carbonite, things are bad, and then things get worse, and then, who knows what happens. But so my husband and I, we were playing characters who were married, and before my knee started acting up, I used to be very combat heavy. I used to run around and have Nerf guns and foam swords, and it was great. But I made the mistake of following one of my real life friends, his character, and this friend is ridiculously fast. That man can run probably twice as fast as me. So I was running around a dark field where the big baddie of the campaign, this robot who was AI robot, she was a very scary big monster baddie.
Yeah.
And I fell behind. And typically at regular LARPs, there's a mechanic where if your character dies, I'm doing air quotes, which the podcast listeners can't see.
Right.
If your character dies, gets injured, whatever, they don't actually final death. There's some sort of chance or odds system, and then they come back, and maybe they have some issues, but the first time your character dies, you have 9 lives or whatever, like you come back. Except if you're at the point in a campaign where you're getting towards the end, things really amp up. I think this was the second or third to last game of that 5-year campaign. That was it. That robot got me and ate me, and I was dead. That character was not coming back.
Okay.
And what my husband said to, my quote unquote corpse like came back, and everyone had to be like, "Oh no, she died," but obviously not sounding like that.
Right,
it was much more convincing. But my husband afterwards said to me, he's like, "I did not like how that felt."
Oh wow!
That you, my wife, my character wife, and he was like, "I'm not." He won't play a player character, married to one of my player characters ever again.
Oh,
because it was too much. It was that me, his wife, playing a character who was his wife, who he interacted with as his wife at that game, dying in game.
Okay.
That was there were too many real life. I mean, there was almost bleed both ways.
Yeah, I was
going to
say that's like a bidirectional, but there's bleed there. That's so that's an example of bleed from what you're describing. Gotcha.
Oh, that LARP bleed, man! It is real and it is hard. Thought we knew what we were doing going into the second voyage, and I'm telling you, curled up like a baby the next morning, just heartbroken and crushed that I was no longer in space.
You know, I hadn't even thought about for second how that would affect second voyage people. And I feel like I should have, because I will experience this after most regular LARP events. It's interesting to hear that you all experience that after your second trip, because I kind of anticipate it happening after every weekend I go LARPing.
Right.
So did it help at all to know that it was potentially going to happen? Did it help you all to know that because you'd experienced that the first time, or was this just hitting you out of the blue again?
I think for me personally, it helped to know that it was normal, but it hit different. And that's the thing that I want to make sure that we discuss. You know, part, I think, of the initial emotional gut punch the first time was that I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea what was going to happen going in. I had no idea what was going to happen once we got there. And so at the end of it all, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. The emotions were so hard and so confusing, I guess, just because they weren't what I expected. And so when I went into it the second time, I expected to have that kind of gut punch and, damn, I don't want to leave again and blah, blah, blah. What I was not expecting is literally waking up the next morning and just like, like the emotions that I had the first time that went over several weeks all happened that one morning. Like it just it was just like.
You were devastated.
Yeah, it was rough. So what I think we really want to talk about is, why does it happen, to the best of your knowledge, since you are so knowledgeable? And then how does Starcruiser make it happen? Like what are they doing throughout your time on the Starcruiser to get you to that point where at the end you're so vested that you do have that emotional gut punch?
Even multiple times.
Yeah.
I mean, to do it once, that's an accomplishment. For them to do it twice, and from what we've heard people 3 and 4 times, it doesn't stop. There's actually one point I want to make before we even move on there.
Perfect.
It is absolutely known that we are all fanboys and fangirls to our core about the cast members, about the performers playing these roles. They bring them to life. I believe the unsung heroes are the people either, where is it? Is it at the Lucasfilm Story Group? Is it at the Imagineering? At what point? I mean, there's a whiteboard at some point, and all these incredible moments that these characters bring to, these performers bring to life, those had to be whiteboarded at some point. How do they make these deep emotional connections super quick? They had to come up with all these character setups. The Wraith and Gaia setup. Captain Kevins has a setup. Lenka, all these characters have a setup that they had to come up with for these performers to portray. And I just think that's really kind of a fascinating step that, a lot of people don't think about. This was just ideas on paper at some point that they had to
evolve.
There are definitely people with LARP experience as part of the team. I remember when the Halcyon was kind of new and they were thinking about it, they were advertising for an immersive experience director. And I know people who know a person who's very much involved and at a high level, who big time in LARPing. And all of these lessons I'm talking about, I am kind of a surface level. I haven't run games, but the people with the LARP background who have been involved in the Halcyon are basically the top people, the most skilled at creating. Like they know their stuff. The people who are involved, and I know people who know people.
Yeah.
The LARP community has a lot of skills, and so that convention it's called Intercon, and there are games that are short. They're like there could be 2-hour games, 3-hour games, 4-hour games. A lot of my friends are running games, and I am fully expecting to be emotionally wrecked within a 3-hour game time.
Wow. Okay.
So when you're considering there's a lot of LARPing knowledge that has gone into creating this experience, it's something that LARPers are good at. Game designers, they know how to do that from experience and a lot of play testing. But I just, so go ahead.
I'm so sorry. So from your perspective, as somebody who has done LARPing for so long and has experienced the Starcruiser, what is the Starcruiser doing to pull you in? Like I get it because I've been there. We've all been there. So we understand what you're saying, but they've only got 48 hours. And what are they doing for you to be so emotionally invested that at the end of 48 hours, gut punch?
The drop.
What are they doing? What are they doing? I'm just kidding.
It's the cast members. The cast members are phenomenal. I mean, the story, those human emotions, but it's what the cast members are able to do. They take that story, they completely embody their characters, and they're able to read the people they're interacting with. They very quickly can tell, all right, who is ready to dive all in, who's not going to feel self-conscious if they need to be the center of attention for something. But the thing is, they are so completely those characters that you just feel like you're talking and interacting with a regular person. I mean, if you got on a cruise ship and the cruise director's like, hey, I need your help because the pineapple shipment is late and we can't have this wedding. The pineapples,
Yeah.
You're gonna want to help them. And I think deep down,
that's a good point.
Deep down, people are good. We want to do the right thing. And when people ask you for help, your instinct is to help them. So I think that's just the quickest way I can condense down is they are those characters. Whenever you talk to them, whenever you interact with them, they are those characters, and they are asking for your help, and they're sincere. So you can absolutely have an actor portraying a character who's not sincere, but all of those characters believe 1,000% in in their causes, in what they're trying to do, and if you don't help them, you feel the weight of those consequences. Mm-hmm. And I think they talk about, you hear about certain politicians, how they make you feel like you're the only one in the room. Mm-hmm. The cast, they make you feel like you're the only one in the room. And there's no way to not respond to that. I mean, it's if someone walks up to you and says, hey, I really need your help, it's really hard to say no to that. With the caveat, especially for women and non-binary folks, if someone walks up to you and you don't feel threatened by them, it's very, if someone just walks up to me and says, I need your help, that's just out in the wild. That's
right. Sure. Right.
Because in that Starcruiser, you're safe there. You're physically safe there. It lets you just dive in. And I think a big part of that is when you start to see the people who are maybe a little more self-conscious about maybe looking silly. Once you see other people diving in, and once you see that they're getting interactions, you want to. And humans are social creatures. And when it's like you see two people lining up, you say, oh, okay, that's the line. You get in the line. You don't always understand it. It's subconscious. But once you see people starting to help once you see people interacting. And a lot of times once you see the kids and how the kids are interacting, it brings you back to that, your inner child. We had some phenomenal kids on our voyage, and it was just such a joy to see them interacting, especially with a certain character who seems to just be recruiting all the kids. It's just so magic. And part of the magic, I think when I was emailing to set this up, I got to, I remember that 501st and Rebel Legion, and at Rhode Island Comic-Con, the New England Garrison and Alderaan Base and the New England Droid Builders and the local Mando clan, we got to help with a kid who had gone on the Halcyon for his Make-A-Wish trip, and his brother and his family got to go. And I ended up being the photographer to capture all those moments, but I ended up wearing my Imperial officer because our member who was organizing was like, oh, he's been on the Halcyon. If you want to bring any of that interaction and kind of keep that going. And I'm like, well, and I was able to kind of continue that. I had my camera going and stuff, but it was so amazing to get a chance to talk to this kid and his brother who had an incredible experience with that magic, and was able to now he got a chance to meet a ton of amazing actors from Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian and
That's
Andor, and just see how that joy was continuing for him, and knowing that he got to have that experience on the Halcyon. And then we had one of our Chewbacca's came out, it was amazing to kind of watch him looking at Chewbacca, especially knowing how things go on the ship and in Galaxy's Edge and all of that. And I think that also kind of ties into what makes Star Wars a really phenomenal experience for people who aren't used to LARPing or role playing. Is we're all little kids when it comes to Star Wars. I mean, I've been a member of Rebel Legion since 2016 and the 501st since 2017. And I still become a 5-year-old girl again anytime Darth Vader shows up, anytime we've got a Chewbacca. But it's just magic. And I think Disney was very smart to pick Star Wars as the property to make this experience. Because in theory, there's a whole bunch of ways they could have gone. But for Star Wars, adults are little kids again. When they see Darth Vader, when they see Boba Fett, when they see Mando, they're just little kids. It's just, it'd be interesting if some brain scientist or psychologist did research on what is it about Star Wars that just makes us all little kids. I think that's another part of what makes that, what draws us in so quickly. But again, I also wouldn't discount that 48-hour time period, because lot, you think of how much happens during that time. And I mean, I guess if you add up the active waking hours you have, but compare that to going to see a movie. So last weekend we went to see, my husband and I we got to see Wakanda Forever. And I cried during the trailer. I remember I saw the trailer before Rogue One, and I knew it was going to be emotional. And we went to, my husband, I went back to the car, and he went to pick up some Shake Shack. And I was sitting in the car, and I just started crying again. It was outside of the movie, it was afterwards. And that was, I think, maybe 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
And it created that, because part of the thing is, it's not just the time you're on the Starcruiser that creates those emotions. I've got Star Wars memories from when I was 5 years old, watching Return of the Jedi with my dad on a square TV. For anyone who's listened to the first podcast I joined you all on, for me, Carrie Fisher was such a huge part of Star Wars for me, a huge part. And so for me, my character and how my love for Star Wars manifests, so much of that is Leia, and Leia is Carrie Fisher. So for me, a lot of my emotions on the Halcyon were thinking about Carrie Fisher and how we lost her, and how so much of Star Wars is because of her, and so much of how, I mean, honestly, if it weren't for Carrie Fisher and Princess Leia, I wouldn't be into Star Wars the way I am. And that's where, for me, for watching Wakanda Forever, it wasn't just the movie. It was also thinking about Chadwick Boseman and how much he means to so many kids and adults. And that mourning that loss of that actor who created that character. And there are people who go on the Starcruiser who are going because their significant other loves it, Star Wars, or their kids love it. But I feel like the people who have that intense emotional reaction, we're the ones who can say, here's where I was when I first saw Star Wars. Here's my first Star Wars memory. And I think that helps because there's very few people who are going to spend that much money on the experience who don't love Star Wars.
Right.
You know, decades of the fandom. But when it's interactive, you're more invested. I mean, if you think about if you're taking a class, if you're sitting and just passively taking notes, you're not going to get as much out of a class as if you are engaging in conversation. And folks who are listening to this podcast, they're going to enjoy it, but it's not going to be as awesome for them as it is for us here having this conversation, being interactive.
Right.
So I'm always impressed by when game designers or plot writers can pull in emotions quickly out of nowhere, but they practice a lot. They practice it a lot.
Well, and then those are the whiteboard experiences that you're talking about, Martin. Those people probably designed, there's probably a level, and no spoilers, anybody, I get it. So, but there's probably a level, some of those characters that we're in love with, they probably brought that story in specifically to elicit these kind of emotions.
Isn't that fantastic?
Oh, it's nearly diabolical, frankly. but it's and I mean that in jest, of course. But when you said the whiteboard, and Jen, when you said what you said, oh my gosh! Now I bet you I know why a particular storyline that we were all very invested on the cruise.
It's crafted to do that.
Precisely what I was going to say. Yes, and that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and I think
plot writers are absolutely diabolical.
Yeah,
absolutely. It is. We joke about it because and it's one of those things where you don't want to make people cry. Like in the regular world, you don't want to do stuff to people to make them cry. But in a theatrical setting, in a LARP setting, in a film or media setting, it's not done with malice. It's to give that catharsis, to create that intense emotional experience. And I have definitely had friends come up to me after a game where I did make them cry, and they'll kind of like act fake mad at me. But we do that because we love that. We love creating those experiences. We love that because when you get to experience that in a controlled, safe environment, you get to experience it in a safe way, and you get to enjoy it.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I'm a huge, giant fan of Jaws. And Steven Spielberg has said many times over the years that when they were building that movie, he knew that there was one more scream he could get out of people. Mm-hmm. And so he crafted the whole experience with Ben Gardner's head popping out. And he crafted that to elicit that scream. And when people screamed at his test screens, he's like, aha, I did it. I made them scream. So that's probably... and I'm having an epiphany right now. It didn't quite occur to me that was a design crafted experience, to use your word, Martin. That's crazy.
When they make Christine cry in the cargo hold with that moment, and everyone knows,
right?
I mean, the performers are like, yes, we reached this person.
Well, I didn't think that until today. I mean, this is literally, it's like,
I mean, this is a recipe.
Wow.
All put together by the best cooks in the business.
Wow.
I mean, that's just
crazy.
How they can translate.
And the cast members, I'm making assumptions, but hopefully maybe someone will correct me if I'm wrong. But for me, when I'm staffing, if I'm running with a character during an emotional scene, I'm watching the faces and the reactions of the players. Mm-hmm. I'm watching to see if it looks like it's going too far. A lot of times LARP will deal with death and things like that. And a dear friend at a game had some real life loss, and she had to step out of the scene. It was hitting too close to home. Mm-hmm. I'm watching because you can tell the difference, especially when they're people you've worked with. You can tell the difference between that catharsis, interacting, crying, and like, no, this is a real life thing I need to break. And game LARPs have safety mechanisms that if people are having too many real life feelings, they can tap out and take care of themselves, because safety, emotional safety, physical safety is always paramount.
Sure.
as I'm doing a scene, and I say scene, but it's not written out as a scene. I have my idea of the information I need to say, but it's not a script. But I'm watching, and you're watching people's faces, you're watching their reactions, seeing what they're reacting to, and if that's maybe where you want to go more to kind of twist that emotional knife in a little more. But it can also be really jarring. I remember the first time I realized I'd made a player cry. It was like the dog that catches the squirrel and doesn't know what to do with it. I was like, wait a minute.
Uh-oh.
I
Now
was like, I did that. I put, because I had done the writing. I had created a character based on how players were reacting to just a random NPC and how they wanted to help that random NPC. And that was what really, really got me hooked on that experience. And that roller coaster of emotions that will result in that drop after the fact, that will result sometimes in that bleed. And I feel like you can experience absolutely both of those terms. It's not a drop or bleed. It's usually an all of the above thing. The drop, it's just when you notice you're feeling more down afterwards. And that the bleed can also be when you're craving those emotions again. You want those emotions again. It's just, especially as humans, we have been telling stories to each other since the beginning of time. And we know how to create emotions in each other. We know how to comfort each other. We know how to make each other laugh. We love to do that with art. I mean, think about cartoons, think about jokes. There's so much of that human experience is sharing emotions with others and creating those experiences. And I think that the Halcyon is kind of that pinnacle of that for Star Wars fans. And I mean, I've definitely read reviews. Well, not reviews, but I've seen posts from people on Facebook who were not the Star Wars fan in their family, and they had an amazing time. Mm-hmm. I found it was very helpful for me and enriching for me and made my experience better because of my huge Star Wars background knowledge. But they're people. The characters are people. Mm-hmm. Their problems aren't necessarily strictly Star Wars problems. And there's something that everyone can engage in as well.
Oh, no question. Christine, we went on the second voyage, and all three of us felt that bleed, that drop from our first voyage. Mm-hmm. I was worried that the bleed or the drop, I'll just say the drop, was going to be just as bad the second time. What did you experience the second time? How was it for you?
Horrible. I mean, in the best possible way, but horrible. The first time, I would have to say it was more of a, if we're going to use the terminology, it was more of a bleed. It was, once we got back, it was just like that emotional feeling didn't stop. Okay. It was the, constant thinking about what we did, what we could have done. 2 weeks later, it was, can't wait till we go again. Mm-hmm. So it was all those kind of like, it was just kind of a daily, like, hey, do you remember when? Can we do it again? And like you said, we did quite a few, lunches or breakfasts after, once we finally decided we were going to go again. And it just kept that emotion kind of running through our day to day. The second voyage was more of a drop. And I have to only assume it was because we were so immersed this time. Where the first time it was, we had character names and we called ourselves by those names. We were in costume, but it wasn't like we were just, it was all FOMO and, ooh, look at the shiny thing. And we just kind of, followed everything that we possibly could and just like really just enjoyed it as a whole. Where when we went back the second time, we were in character from the time we got in line to get in the Halcyon. And because we had other people on the Halcyon that had seen either the videos on YouTube or had been following the podcast or whatever, they were already invested in helping those characters on the voyage. So it just made it that much more immersive. And through each of the storylines that we ended up following, it really did feel more this time like we were the stars of our own movie. That might be part of the challenge with this second voyage, is that in the first voyage, it was probably 20%, 25% Malie and 75% Christine.
Okay.
Because we were just going and having fun and it was whatever. Where this time around, it was probably reversed, where it was like 75 or 80% Malie and like 20% Christine. And with the character interactions, there were times when they talked to you and you forget which one they're talking to.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And it's engineered that way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why, Gaia being a Twi'lek is so clever, because they can count on, just on a whiteboard again, they know there's the odds of there being a guest that's a Twi'lek on that ship is better than 50-50. Twi'leks are super common for people to role play as on the so there's always someone that Gaia can connect to Twi'lek the way they did with you.
Right.
It's diabolically clever. Yeah. I mean, that's her being a Twi'lek was such an amazing decision, because again, Ryloth has got this incredible history, and again, Christine, I would go on a limb to say, I mean, you didn't know much about the Ryloth history the first trip you went.
Right. It was strictly whatever we had seen in Clone Wars or Rebels.
Yeah, and you really did a deep dive into Ryloth and whatnot before trip number 2. So I think the first time you connected with it simply because it was just catharsis and just at the experience itself. The second time, I think you really connected with it as a character.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
Because frankly, for me... Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Well, and that with Ryloth and all that, it ties into those universal themes. It ties into what happens in the real world.
Right.
And any person with an ounce of compassion can listen to Gaia. You buy into that, and you see that injustice, you see that aspect. And I can only imagine doing this trip as a Twi'lek. That's intense.
Yeah.
I am not shocked. I am not shocked that you are having, because you're having Christine's emotions and you're having Maui's emotions.
That's
like
there's the bleed right there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And that's, as LARPers, you have the character emotions, you have your own emotions, and a lot of times those character emotions, they dig up stuff. They dig up regular emotions. There's a lot of LARPers. They're kind of a joke sort of half talking about how there's some LARPers who use LARP as their therapy, which LARP can absolutely be therapeutic. There's some people who should. I mean, there's a lot of times where people need to use actual therapy and not use LARP.
They shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
You're working some stuff out here that you probably shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But I know some people who LARP has been what helped them to realize that they needed that additional help. And I would be shocked if at least one of your listeners doesn't hear this conversation, make that connection and say, this is bringing stuff up. Or maybe that drop, that bleed is carrying on and it's not going away. That's the point where this art has helped you realize that you need to get some more help. You need to work on that. Mm-hmm. But obviously that doesn't mean that all drop or all bleed means that.
Right.
There's
right.
that.
Sure.
There's that process. It's when it drags on and it gets in the way of normal life. But
right.
But when you get off, you get that dichotomy of those like really intense emotions that you're feeling miserable. But there's also, I know for me, there's also that part of you almost don't want it to go away, because the longer you get from your voyage, I mean, the morning after my voyage, and I talked about in the spoiler section of the other episode of what I was thinking about that just made me start bawling in my parents' bathroom the day we got back. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can tell that story now, and most days not start bawling, but early on it's really there. but the thing, you don't have to give up that emotional depth. With the Halcyon, like I don't have the answer for that process on the Halcyon because it's very expensive to keep doing that.
Oh, yes, it is.
And that's where I kind of feel like all the money I've spent on LARPs and on LARP costumes over the years, I'm like, all right, well, that's paying off now because I can use that for to get that Halcyon fix until I save up for the next time. But for folks who have no interest in regular LARP, I don't have an answer other than continuing to talk about it, and participate in all the different Facebook groups to talk about it, enjoy all the new Star Wars media that's coming out. But I hope we get more regular LARPers because of this experience too, though.
So Jen, am I to understand that if someone was to go onto Starcruiser and then come off and then create a podcast solely about Starcruiser and let it completely take over their entire life on their non-working hours for weeks and months on end, that would be an unhealthy processing drop?
I think it's an amazing way because here's the thing: it's you've taken one experience and now you've created a community. You've met people you would have never met before. Like I might have brushed by y'all at Celebration, but I would have never gotten a chance to have this conversation. And it's almost the way to think about it is if you've looked at, there's paintings and sculpture that get you, or music. If you go to an orchestra that gets you, it's like, should we not listen to that music? Should we not look at those paintings, look at those sculptures because they get to us emotionally? Of course not. That's what we are as humans. So a chance to continue, because I have no shame about calling LARP and the Halcyon and all this stuff, calling it art. Because it is art. It's costume. It is art.
Yes.
And talking about art makes it fresh again. Talking about these experiences make it fresh again. And it's what makes us human. It's what makes life worthwhile. We get to enjoy what we enjoy. And I'm very much done with the section of the internet that likes to complain about people enjoying things.
Right, sure.
Yes.
And I think the Starcruiser, because of the price point, is something that is a big target for people who just want to hate on Star Wars.
Yep.
And actually, speaking of the price point in terms of LARP, I haven't done any blockbuster LARP. So there's the regular LARPs I'm talking about that are usually maybe $100 for a weekend, but there's blockbuster LARPs that they'll have them in Europe and it's a longer experience. They'll be in a setting that's much fancier. From what I was reading and from pictures I saw, they had some spaces that were decorated. It was a futuristic thing. I don't know if they had robots that came out and eat these people. Probably not.
I hope not, Jen, because you'd be doomed.
I would be so doomed. I find other ways to get in trouble other than just robots eating me. But they didn't have the expenses of the whole building, but they didn't have economies of scale. But it's interesting because when the Starcruiser pricing came out and people were just angry. And still, anytime there's anything, I feel like 90% of the stuff you see on most parts of the internet on the Halcyon is just very angry. It was interesting to me looking at the pricing for blockbuster LARPs for that event where it was supposed to be very immersive, but you still had to pay for lodging and food in New York City. But also as a LARP staffer, I know how much unpaid work goes into regular games and how many hours were on site. And honestly, I'm shocked that the price wasn't higher. I think another thing that makes it hard after the Halcyon is we love it so much. And it's hard to hear those criticisms that are not based in anything that is in reality. And yes, it is not financially accessible to the vast majority of people, but there isn't a way to do that particular experience cheaper.
Right.
And if people want that immersive experience, they can do that. There's LARP groups all over the world. And I can almost guarantee someone could find a game where they can NPC, where they can staff for free and not even gas money. They could probably, most games are great about getting people rides. A lot of games feed their NPCs, but it's not, the trade-off is it's not official Star Wars. It's not luxury. I mean, the last camp I stayed, it's a summer campsite and the bathroom is gross. I would never stay in a hotel that had bathrooms as dirty as all these summer camps. Don't do it for LARP. Because that love is there. Like, you're basically like, a lot of the mats, they're like these plastic covered 2 inches of foam mattress. Like, I would never sleep in a hotel that had that kind of mattress, but it's that love of the art that's there. And I think when people are thinking about the Halcyon, when people are experiencing all the emotions after the Halcyon, especially, I don't know, it's really interesting to compare the Halcyon to LARPs, because there's some events where we have more players, there's some events where there's a few less. And sometimes it's nicer when there's less people.
Sure.
And sometimes it's nice when everything's busy.
Well, something about this episode that really connects really well with an episode that we just did and an episode that we're just about to do is to when we're talking about affordability, which can never not be discussed with Starcruiser. I mean, there is that Starcruiser Suite Finder that we just did an episode for that people will have just heard that helps people find like-minded folks to make this a more affordable thing. And we've learned, I mean, that is a game changer for folks. That turns something that's impossible into something that is doable.
Right.
We'd encourage folks to check out that episode, and it's just kind of fun listening to what Jen's talking about. We're about to record an episode for Starcruiser fan fiction. There is a very, very healthy community of folks that just love these characters so much that they're writing fan fiction about it, and it's kind of just LARP on paper.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's just fun to see all of...
Well, and on what you're saying about the Suite Finder, that's how I found our two roommates.
Yeah.
And we had so much more fun with that. It's like, it's summer camp for grown-ups.
Right.
We had so much more fun with them than my husband and I would have alone. Like, I think my husband hung out with one of our roommates more than he hung out with me, because they were in the bar, they were doing Starcruising.
He saw some robots around.
Only in the bar.
Yeah.
It was, but it's also you sleep in your cabin, you shower. And we had logistics. Like, I knew I was going to be awake first in the morning, but we said, okay, here's when we need to, in case someone wakes up first, here's the time someone needs to get up. So we get in the shower, and it was really fun experiencing some of the Easter eggs in the cabin together and sitting together dinner. And because we were all doing slightly different things, comparing what happened. And it's like, we're still friends. Like, you make friends. I think it would also be a ton of fun to go with friends you already know.
Sure.
But it's never a bad thing to make new friends.
Right.
Nope.
Especially new Star Wars friends.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Starcruiser people are the best people.
Well, we really, really appreciate you coming on today, Jen. It's always a pleasure, always enlightening. Always feels like a little bit of therapy. Thanks.
Yes, it's good.
But tell everybody where they can find you on the web, the Facebook group, on Instagram, everything.
So especially for folks who have gotten off the Starcruiser recently, I help run a Facebook group, Galactic Starcruiser Drop Post-Voyage Emotional Support with my friend Naomi. And that's a really great resource. On Instagram, I'm Jen Eyre, JENEYRE Cosplay, COSPLAY. I'm also Jen Eyre Photography. And a lot of times you'll see Star Wars costumes and things I photograph related to Star Wars over there. I also share sewing patterns that are really useful basis to start with for people who want to make their own Starcruiser costuming. And that's on my blog, jeneyre.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jen. Appreciate it. We're going to figure out another way to bring you on into another episode in the near future, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well, as always, it is amazing to talk to Jen. She has such a wealth of knowledge regarding LARPing and how LARPing feeds into our relationship with Galactic Starcruiser. I can't be the only one who constantly tears up at the conversation regarding Galactic Starcruiser.
Yeah, that epiphany moment. I mean, the fact that, again, I knew that someone wrote the story of the Galactic Starcruiser, but now to kind of see that the LARPers who created it really knew that some of us would get a lot out of these emotional beats, and now just to see a little bit more behind the scenes and to see the Matrix, as you said earlier today, Christine, that was a huge epiphany for me.
It's puppets on strings is really, that's
Yeah.
exactly how it's been designed and how beautifully it works.
Yeah, and I mean, I pursue art forms that make me cry. I mean, I wanted to go see West Side Story, Steven Spielberg's version of West Side Story. I was specifically excited because I wanted to have that moment at the end where I was feeling those feelings. And so I know I pursue those kind of things. So to see that the artists behind Galactic Starcruiser have kind of taken those emotional pieces and engineered the experience so that we have these feelings, that was just super cool.
If we're puppets on a string, I am happy to be your Pinocchio.
Right.
Well, folks, we would love to hear your stories on Galactic Starcruiser. And Christine, where could people find us on the interwebs to do that?
Well, you can always email us at heroesofthehalcyon@gmail.com. We love to hear your stories, either before or after going on the Halcyon. Send us your pictures, send us your backstories. We love all of it. You can always find us on Instagram at Heroes of the Halcyon, on Twitter at Halcyon_Heroes, and now on the new Hive Social at Halcyon Heroes.
Well, it is always fun to shoot the poodoo with all the Starcruiser superfans out there. So until next episode, you know it's our honor. Let's raise our glasses with that Halcyon toast.
Tabooey Tay!